All right. Hey, thanks. So we will talk about how do we use data to create organizational change, and we will be talking about org charts. So it's not like the most interesting topic. So I will start with explaining you where I'm coming from with this. So when I started in finance, and I was working for an organization with a revenue of around $800 million. And we were trying to figure out how do we predict sales. And the reason for that is not that we just want to predict sales for the sake of predicting sales, is that we had 15 factories producing our products. And if you don't know how much you're going to sell next month, you don't know how much you're going to produce. So there is a huge impact on your cost and profitability, knowing how much sales you're going to have. And so what we did is we talked to the sales organization. The sales organization said, oh, we have Salesforce.com. We are putting all of our opportunities in the Salesforce.com. So when we have a visit with a customer, we put it as an opportunity. So 100,000, 200,000, we know everything, fine. So we asked them, so how many opportunities, what is the revenue that you have next month? And they're like, we have $1 billion of revenue of opportunities for next month. And I was like, we make $800 million a year, right? How do you come to $1 billion per month? And well, they're like, yeah, you should calculate it by the win conversion rate. And it's like, okay, thank you. What is the conversion rate? We don't know. So basically, the issue was that they were putting the opportunities on a system, but they were not connecting that with the invoicing and the sales they were doing on the other system. So this conversion rate, so how many opportunities versus how much sales I'm generating, was completely made up. And this is where I realized, and this is why I went into this organization more and more into understanding how do you build a data organization. I realized that companies are doing digital innovation without the data, and this is happening all the time. So this is just one example of, okay, we are spending a lot of money on Salesforce.com, we are spending a lot of money on the ERP system, but we are not able to predict our sales even though we have all of this data, right? So basically, that's why I started to think about what is the right way of doing a data organization, because at the time, SAP was managed by one team, Salesforce by another team, and the data was done by me. So it was like 3 different teams trying to put all of this together. So the way this was working was very inefficient. And there was no way to actually, from a data perspective, to actually change the organization, because what am I going to do? I'm going to try to convince the SAP team and the Salesforce team to talk to each other. So how do we do that? So just quickly about the company. The company, I founded 1.5 years ago with basically the idea of helping organization to create a data analytics department, but also to basically focus on getting things done. So we are actually very heavily focused on data engineering rather than data science and AI, because when we started, a lot of the issues that we saw, and we're talking companies with billions of dollars of revenue and thousands of employees, they came to us and said, we want to do AI. And then I was like talking and realizing that a lot of the issues were actually more on the data engineering side of things. So how do we combine data? How do we do basic stuff, right? You can combine an opportunity with an invoice in Excel. But how do you do that at scale when you have 2,000, 3,000 salespeople and many, many different data sets? So that's what we focus on. And I think you all know this. Data is fooling a lot of things, and so on and so forth. But one thing that I want to be very clear about, what we see from our side, is essentially everything you can think about that is a little bit smart has to work with data. So you can look at things in another perspective, that the majority of the applications that you are using, and we'll talk about that, are basically data with a little bit of UI on top, right? But then how are the organization? And again, my definition of organization here, or company here, is we're talking about companies in manufacturing and healthcare sector. This is what we work with normally. And those are companies that have been in the business for sometimes 50 or even 100 years, right? And they're trying to change. And this is the majority of the companies that you have today. If you look at the stock market, the biggest companies, those are very old companies. They're trying to change, right? And they do a lot of digital innovation. So like on the, you have this digital roadmap. They all talk about, oh, we need to do digitalization. I'm like, okay. And they're trying to do digitalization by buying applications. So they buy different kind of applications, but there is no one in the background trying to understand how all of these things are going to connect together and what data are we generating from this, right? And how we're going to be analyzing this data afterwards. So there is a lot of digital innovation that is failing because, and where does it fail is usually on the data side of things. There is also a lack of skilled talent. And here, I mean, they're hiring a lot of data scientists, but the talent is also missing on the leadership side. How do you come to a point where, as a leader, you can look at your organization also from a data point of view, not just processes, right? And that's kind of missing. Technology is obvious. I mean, there's a lot of discussion there. Governance is less obvious, but as organizations are going, and I will show you what the organization today look like, as companies are growing, they are having more and more data, and they have to figure out who can have access to this data. I mean, I was just having a call with a company that just right now, 5 minutes ago, they are trying to get telemetry data out of machines in the hospital, and they have to comply with all kinds of regulations. How do you actually make sure that you are complying with those regulations and that the people that can see this data, and the ones that cannot. And it's actually a very complex problem when you look at it. Again, when you look at it at scale, we're not talking about 5 people, we're talking about thousands of people, right? But before we go there, what is the connection with a startup? Because they're like, okay, now we're talking about the companies in the business for 100 years, then now we're talking about startups. The thing that fascinates me the most about startups is that a lot of them have one single focus, to reach product market fit, and that's it, right? So Uber is about getting from A to B, for instance. That's it, right? They are super focused on that thing. And a lot of them are also super close to the data. Like Uber is basically a data company with some UI on top, right? The thing is, and if you worked in big companies before, you will know that, but usually in big companies, this very focused approach is usually lacking. And this is where I see that when you look at a big company and how you build your data organization and your changes based on data, where there is a lot of opportunity actually to do something, and not only from a leadership perspective, but also from a data professional perspective, right? So yes, so this is the fun part. This is org charts, my favorite topic. Basically, when you look at the way companies organize data analytics today, you have to realize the majority of them, what they do is they do a very heavily centralized model. They are used to roll out ERP systems. So that's a system for invoicing and so on. They have been rolling out ERP systems for 30 years. And usually this is an IT department job. So what they think is like data, more or less, technology, let's put it under IT. And then what you end up is with a very centralized organization that has very little knowledge of what is happening in the business, which is exactly the opposite of what the startup is doing, right? The startup is combining the technology with the business domain. And when you don't combine the two, what you end up with is a bunch of people in one department doing business intelligence, but they give you a number is 1 billion or 2 billion. For them, it's the same. But when you talk to a finance person, there is a huge difference if your sales is 1 billion or 2 billion, right? And then actually what is happening more and more is that even though they start centralized, because the business cannot easily work with IT, because usually when you have a small team, all of the requests can take up to 6 or 1 year. So you want to add 1 column in your database? Sure, it's going to take 6 months, right? So what the business is doing is they build their own shadow, they call it a shadow IT practices. So now these big companies, they actually are applying the centralized model, and on top the decentralized operating model, which is this is a nice word for a mess, right? Because that's what it is. Because you have a lot of people doing a lot of things in different tools. I've seen one time a guy trying to do an ETL job on Power BI with 55 tables. It took like 1 day to run something that in a cloud would run in, I don't know, 5 seconds. I mean, this is how bad it gets. Yeah? And on top of that, none of that has any governance. So that guy is connecting to 50 tables, he does a join, he put it on Power BI as an extract, and he can publish the data to the whole company. And if there is sensitive data or GDPR data, the company can get a huge fine. No one knows about that. The other model is what we are researching or moving towards, is the hybrid model, which is trying to put these two models together in an organized way. I mean, it is also popular today to talk about data mesh, but we tried in production with actual companies. And the idea of having completely decentralized model for companies that are very big, it's not working, at least not right now with the technology we have. I think it's mostly a technology issue, and I will come back to that. But right now, we are more towards, let's have something centralized, let's have a centralized team, but let's also allow other teams to be, right, to work together with us. So let's try to build a hybrid model between those two solutions. And here I go into more details. We don't have to talk, we just talked about this. So now the question is, okay, so you want to build a model that works for hybrid, works decentralized, but you might still have to work also centralized, because companies might take anything between 3 to 5 years to change something like this. So you're going to have to work in different ways. So you need to figure out a way to make data analytics work for a centralized, decentralized hybrid model, right? So what we figured out, and that's our takeaway from all of this, been doing this for the last 5 or 6 years. First of all, to think about having, yes, let's have a centralized team. We call it the data center of excellence. So there should be one central team in the company. That's all they do, right? And this is a pretty known concept, so it's pretty obvious already. It's not super new. But then what we are saying is, data platform should be shared between the central team and all of the other teams doing analytics, which in this, by the way, in big companies, it's not today usually what happens. So when I started with a Tableau and an Exasol database. IT was using Talent. They would not give me access to stuff. I said, give me access to AWS. The answer was no, right? My takeaway is IT should not be saying no to these things. IT should be like, let's all use the same tools. For many, many reasons, but some basic reasons. If you have one data platform, you can train everyone on the same technology stack, and that alone is huge, because today we are training people on 55 different tools or ways of doing the same thing. The governance is in one place, so that works. And then also the data is in the data platform, so everyone is using the same data, which is also great, right? And that's on the technology side, right? So you need a data platform team working on that. We usually work, those are usually data engineers and data platform engineers, also software developers working in this team. And then you need a data center of excellence. This is usually data analysts and data scientists. And our idea is not that the data center of excellence should be like telling people how to do their job. And again, if you have worked in big companies, you know what I mean. But usually you have a department who knows they have the perfect knowledge, and they're going to go to people and say, you're doing it wrong. And you say, why? Because you are doing it wrong. And that's not very helpful. Yeah? It just pisses people off. So our approach is have a central department, but take the people from this department and put them in the teams that are actually close to the business. So you actually help them, right? Instead of saying, you are doing it wrong, I'm going to give you one person to work with you for 6 months or a year, and I'm going to help you grow in the right way, right? So this whole approach is actually to try to avoid pushing back on people and teams, but actually avoiding the pushbacks, avoiding trying to do top-down decisions, trying to say, hey, if you work the way we work, you are going to work better. You're going to get your results faster, right? And you're going to be more connected with the business problem, because this brings us back to the startup. What is the startup approach in all of this? The idea is to, each one of those is a team, and those teams are specifically dedicated to one problem. So I'm solving how to connect, not really one problem, but one domain. So I'm solving the problem of predicting sales. That should be one team job, not one person job, because predicting sales requires finance people, requires data analysts, data engineers, sometimes even programmers, if you have to do fancy stuff. So this is one team, not one person, right? And that team has to probably work on this problem for 2 to 3 to 5 years even, or even indefinitely. So focusing to having these autonomous teams that combine all of this knowledge in one place is how you get really a problem solved, the same way a startup would do, right? Yeah, this is more information, but I mean, for the ones that are interested in the finances, on the left side, just make sure that you have a funding model, because if you don't have a funding model that makes sense, all of this is going to, down the drain. Don't take any management promises. Ask them how this is going to be budgeted, whatever you are doing, because it's going to be a nightmare afterwards if you try to figure out how to fund all of it. And this is more on the data platform side of things. So we call it Nesto, but it's basically a data platform based on a data lake. The idea is, if you have seen the old IT slides, usually you have the ERP system as a core. So you have the SAP, for instance, and then all of the business processes around it. The idea is you have one system to run all of your business processes. So our idea is to say, take SAP out of the core for many reasons. We talk about that on a coffee later. But put the data in the core, right? Say, forget about the application. Put the data as your core. And now build all of your applications and your processes around this idea, right? So all of your processes and applications have to produce and consume data, which has to be then coordinated and synchronized in one place, right? And then around all of this, build your services, your products, your applications, your analytics, right? So it's like combining all of it together. And today, usually you see a very isolated approach. You either have a vendor that says, I'm going to sell you the best way of doing machine learning, or you have a consulting saying, I'm going to do this for you. But combining the data with the technology, I think, is where we have the most value. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. So that's us. We are also hiring. So in case you want to check our website, we also are hiring right now. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay for some questions.
Yes.
Are you up to it?
Yep.
Do you want some questions?
Yeah, sure.
Let's see if we have some. So guys, this was extremely practical. Do you have maybe some questions for Alessio? Well, before the coffee break.
Yes.
We have one here. Can you just please wait for the mic? Yeah, I will bring it. Don't worry. Yeah, I will. Here you go.
So in our company, we are also trying to have a centralized platform for our data. But there are cases because that different platforms are designed for different data patterns. So do you think it's avoidable to have a single data platform for a company?
When I talk about a single data platform, I mean a single strategy, right? And especially having data in one place. But for instance, you have real-time data ingestion and you have batch data ingestion. Those are two different technologies. Batch we do with Python, real-time you can do with Kafka or any other solution. So you can have different solutions, but within the same platform. What is very important is that the access management is done in one place. That makes sense? Yeah. So things like that you can still have across, and other things are going to be specialized to the problem. Yeah.
Do I see some more hands? No? Oh, you have a question. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that.
You mentioned budgeting. And
yes.
you mentioned you make sure that your managers do budget this properly. How much money are we talking about here to execute what you are proposing?
Well, I mean, I was just checking the cloud charges on AWS for a basic setup. It's like 3,000 to 5,000 euros a month. but then you have the people factor and so on and so forth. I would say something like $500,000 in a year would be a good start. This is what I had when I started. But what is more important than the value is how you budget, because the business is going to try to push you to budget on scope. Say, I give you the requirements, you tell me how much it costs. My point is try to budget on teams. You say, look, this is the team, it's going to cost this much per month, and it's going to solve your problems, but we cannot commit to a very specific scope. Also because usually business requirements are BS. Yeah. So the methodology of the budget is also quite important. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we maybe have one more? We do. We have two more. Okay. The light is right in my face, and your hands are straight down, so I didn't see them in the first round.
May I ask you something? This whole concept, it looks really similar to data mesh concept. It's no differences, but only your way how you see the data mesh concept. Because we are the bank in Serbia which want to implement the whole data mesh concept and start with data mesh. And where is the difference with your concept and data mesh? Because I didn't saw. Only the platform could be, let's say, the way how you will deal with the data mesh concept.
Yeah, I mean, the data mesh concept, it's if you can win that discussion in your organization, that's great, right? But it has a lot of concepts. You know, for instance, the data contract. And getting business to agree on a data contract is very, very complex, right? So there is a lot, and usually what happens is you take that into the central team. So you as a central team end up managing this data contract, right? So there are a lot of these ideas in the data mesh that apply, of course, to this one, but not the whole thing. That's what I'm saying. Like,
but main concept of data mesh is ownership, and ownership should be on the business side, not on the central team. This is the main postulate of data mesh concept.
And that's a great idea if the business agrees. That's what I'm saying. Because unfortunately, sometimes they don't agree, and it might take many, many years of working with them to kind of go in. I think that data mesh, you can see it as a good direction. So this is where we want to be, right? Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Maybe you can just pass it to your colleague. Did you have the same question? Okay.
Cool.
Is that it, guys? Thank you very much, and thank you, Alessio.
Thank you.
It was amazing.